Well, good evening, ghostly invisible audience. It's Guy Peploe here. This evening there's going to be a little event to celebrate the birthday, which is today, of perhaps Scotland's greatest living artist, Elizabeth Blackadder. Now, most of you here will have a connection with Elizabeth as fans and friends. And so at the end of our brief talk from me, there will be a chance to raise a glass of wine and toast Elizabeth. But I thought, despite most of us knowing a great deal about her, it was worth a little reprise of her life and career. And it's personal to some extent, of course. For me, I've known Elizabeth since probably the early 1970s. I can't remember exactly when, but she and John Houston, her husband, lived in Queen's Crescent before they moved further afield into the Grange. And I lived in McLaren Road, so we shared the private park that's inside these Newington streets. And there would be occasional kind of tennis parties and so on. And this very important, rather grand couple for me, John and Elizabeth, were obviously features in my early life. I was so privileged much later on, after 1983, when I started at the gallery, to get to know them both very well. So Elizabeth, she's a Dame of the British Empire. She's DBE. She is the first artist to be honoured with membership of the Royal Academy and the Royal Scottish Academy. And there are myriad other letters after her name representing professional memberships, and I think at least 4 honorary degrees. She has also been Her Majesty's Painter in Limner in Scotland, an important role also. She, as most of you know, is a very humble, otherworldly person who has devoted her life to her craft, to painting, which doesn't mean that she hasn't had time for people. She is a sociable person and has enjoyed many close friendships, both collegiate at the College of Art and within her wider social life. Her origins were in the town of Falkirk, famous for its engineering, and indeed both her father and grandfather were engineers. The grandfather had travelled a great deal, and his home was full of a sort of cornucopia of collected objects, so that idea of the richness of visual culture and the culture of objects was something she grew up with. She also spent quite a lot of time as a little girl in the West with another relation, and I think it was that relationship fostered her intense interest also in botany. There was no question within the family that she wouldn't go on to further education, but the question, I suppose, was whether she might have become a botanist, actually studied the biology of plants, or indeed as an artist. I don't think it was a compromise, but in the end, in 1949, she came to Edinburgh and actually took on the fairly new 5-year fine art degree, which was between the Edinburgh College of Art and Edinburgh University. And I think this did her a great deal of good. It was an extra year, or 2 years, in fact, beyond the ordinary diploma that she might have taken at the college. And the exposure to some of the great figures within the university, as well as at the college, like David Talbot Rice, who's a great Byzantine expert, was very, very important to her indeed. Her first travelling scholarship to Europe with her future husband, John Houston, in 1954, was chiefly spent tracking down the traces of and the riches of Byzantine Europe in Greece and Italy. So there in Edinburgh, she befriended some of the future major figures in what's known as the Edinburgh School, and was taught by others of them, particularly by William Gillis, by Robert Henderson Blythe, by Penelope Beaton. And of course, she met figures like David McClure, David Michie, and of course, John Houston, who became her husband. She graduated in 1954. And in fact, she was married in 1956 to John. And before that, he actually accompanied her on this first traveling scholarship. She then went again, significantly, in 1955 to 1956, and had a residency in Florence. And some of the, she was prolific. She was there on her own through the winter. Actually, John Busby, another colleague from the college, a very early friend, saw quite a lot of her because he was also in Tuscany. She travelled a bit within Tuscany, and a number of wonderful subjects, all on paper, were the fruits of this time. Back in Edinburgh, she was quickly absorbed into the fold of the College of Art. Gillis and Phillipson, of course, was there also teaching, liked to take the kind of star students and offer them positions within the painting school, looking after their own, if you like. And her early paintings, I think you can say they were actually influenced by European art, by movements of Taschism in particular, people like Nicholas de Stael, but also increasingly after a series of exhibitions at the Whitechapel, which would have been certainly seen by these young artists at the Edinburgh School, by American abstract expressionism. I think Philip Guston in particular was an influence. But for her first exhibitions, which took place in the late 1950s, and her first significantly with the Scottish Gallery in 1961, still life painting, with a strong influence of Anne Redpath, you'd have to say, obviously the mother of her great friend, David Michie, is there, and this wonderful rich medium of oil paint, which is a characteristic of the Edinburgh School, of people like Redpath, of course, and Gillis also, is something that she adopted, and you can see as one of the dominant things apparent in these early exhibitions. So this first show with us in 1961 was I think a significant moment, and started a significant and uninterrupted period of exhibition. And I suppose Elizabeth, how would one characterize it best? She's just got on with work. She's quietly, studiously worked, and the honors, the recognition of her genius, if you like, and the honors have flowed towards her quite properly. But it's a quiet life, if you like, that is best represented by her extraordinary richness in her oeuvre. Funny enough, jumping forward in a sense, there's one wonderful website which most of you will be familiar with called Art UK, and a woman called Lydia Figez has put together a selection of the work in public collections, which is what Art UK is, and called it the versatility of Elizabeth Blackadder. Because Elizabeth's enormous popularity has partly been garnered through her membership of the Royal Academy, and obviously the preponderance of the subject of flowers and cats, which are so enormously popular and well disseminated through the medium of gift cards, posters, mouse mats, mugs, and everything else that the Royal Academy shop will stock. But that idea of versatility, if you look at some of these early exhibitions, some of the subjects, of course, that she was taking on, and some of the images that you're seeing on the screen in front of you, which is images changing every 7 seconds or so, shows her extraordinary range and versatility. And I think this is something that people often are surprised by or forget, that she had this great range of interests as a painter. This first show with us in 1961, as I say, heralded an almost unbroken succession of successful exhibitions, and she garnered accolades and commercial success as she went along. A marriage to John, a stable basis, her teaching at the College of Art, of course, her next home in Fountain Hall Road, and travel to Greece, to France, to Spain, to Portugal, and in Scotland to Skye and the Northeast. These were significant opportunities, like Anne Redpath, who was a very good exemplar of a great Scottish woman artist who would travel to sort of feed the imagination and bring things back. Elizabeth Studios in Edinburgh were always absolutely full of the fruits of her travel, particularly latterly in the Far East, obviously, but Scotland as well was a very important locale for her. Some of these wonderful dark, rich paintings, for example, of Skye. The Mediterranean light that she found on journeys to the south of France, and John Huston attested, there was a shift in her palette. It became much lighter in tone. And travel also allowed her to bring back objects. So she would fill this little bit handroad path before her again. She would sort of fill the studio with the fruits of her travels, so all sorts of things, sort of sweetie wrappers and chopsticks and toys, and so that these would inform and enrich her still life subject. She's best known for cats and flowers. And these are undeniably important subjects for Elizabeth Blackadder. Cats are a very significant part of her life. And you can, if you could have an alternative view of Blackadder's oeuvre through the cats, the different cats which obviously came and went, but inhabit still life subjects, stalking almost with disdain through some of the subjects. I remember seeing a picture in the studio 15 years or so ago, and it looked as though Elizabeth had destroyed this almost finished interior still life, or in a fit of anger, perhaps, gone at it with her palette knife. It was slashed. But so she noticed, she said quite casually, "No, I'm afraid that Toby got at that one." So the cats did have a destructive side, but they would, of course, be forgiven more or less anything. Travel was incredibly important to Elizabeth. And you can think of some of the ways in which travel did enrich her painting. Japan, these extraordinary interiors, the sort of shrines, the koi carp gardens and screens. And other aspects of which are important to note, she was a supreme printmaker, and particularly her relationship with the technicians at the Glasgow Print Studio has produced a quite extraordinary body of work, and a variety of work in printmaking also. There's a sort of restlessness, a curiosity, perhaps not restlessness, but a curiosity to try new things, working with the technicians, obviously there. So from the finest dry point of little wildcats in Venice on a tiny scale, through to big screen prints, ambitious sort of subject matter, coloured etching also, pushing her professional practice through the kind of possibilities of printmaking, and bringing some of these ideas back to the studio as she painted also. So travel, incredibly important. Japan, there's a wonderful story where she and John and Elizabeth, I think, on their first visit to Japan, they had an interpreter and who was going to help. And anyone that's been to Japan knows that you move out from the protective ring of tourist Japan, and people don't tend to speak the language. So perhaps you need an interpreter, and the interpreter won't always get things right. So she, being intensely interested in handmade paper, wanted to perhaps see somewhere where handmade paper was produced, but lines got crossed, and she and John had an interminable day at a commercial paper-making factory where they would have to sort of follow the kind of large management team with the managing director leading, and bow down in front of all these great vats of paper being made, which wasn't really what they'd been hoping for or expecting. But Japan enriched her practice without question. And some of the images that you're seeing on the screen of sort of koi carp and interiors with screens, they chimed, I think, with her own rather sort of Zen sensibility. I mean, she had an immaculate sense of the last stroke that was necessary. This was a very sort of poetic ability, I think, as a painter, that things are never overcluttered. There's just the right balance of material in her paintings, as well as her being obviously a superb colorist. Some of the images that we've seen on screen, I think, are some of my favorite ones, and surprising to some people, like the Hoopoe in Sant'Emilio. I'm being brought a glass of wine, which I imagine is because then my time's up, and those that have listened to me before know that I'm capable of whittling on until the last member of the audience is fast asleep. But we must bring things to a close. Elizabeth is incredibly important to the Scottish Gallery. She's incredibly important to Scotland. She is a national treasure. And now in her 90th year, we're hoping to have her for a long time to come. But I think for now, if we could perhaps raise a glass, if you have one there, I'm certainly going to raise a glass to Elizabeth Blackadder, and And thank you all for joining me today. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Elizabeth Blackadder. Thank you, Guy.